Luisa, I am so happy that I can interview you today. Thank you for being here with me. I'm a big fan, big admirer. I find your story and just you as a person so fascinating. And I've been following your work for quite some time now, especially your wonderful Passion Harvest podcast and website and YouTube channel, because you share so many interesting stories uh, and just you glow as a person. So thank you so much for being here today. And I know that you also have some experiences with parallel worlds and with traveling beyond this limited 3D world. So I would just ask you if you could introduce yourself with your own words and maybe tell us a little bit about the journey and how you came to spirituality and to creating this wonderful podcast.
Oh my gosh, that's so many questions. But first I want to say thank you for the beautiful introduction. I think you're incredible as well, and I've done some journeys with you, and wow, what profound experiences. You're an exceptional human being and spirit. So thank you so much. Um, where do I start? I think I've always had a conscious awareness, and I guess we travel through life and we block it off and it comes back. And I guess it started for me when I was very young, or my first memory. Some people remember from birth or very young. I don't. I was very sick when I was young. I had contracted German measles and measles at the same time. And my father didn't really believe in doctors, and I couldn't move for weeks. And I had the most incredible temperatures. And I remember my father carrying me to ice baths just to cool me down. And I remember funny things, lying in bed for weeks on end, and I couldn't eat. All I could barely drink was water. And I remember being so hungry, and I kept asking my father, please bring me spaghetti bolognese sandwiches, which my grandmother had made me, and they never came. I was too sick and I was delirious, but incredibly conscious and perceptive, even though I was very young. And something happened, and this experience wasn't comfortable, but it's so memorable. And I started getting very, very big and very, very small.
Mm.
And it expanded and contracted. I felt like a massive giant, and I felt like the tiniest little piece of energy. I was still me, but the expanse was incredible. And it was almost like, it's so hard to describe these experiences in words, but it was almost like I was me, but around me it wasn't solid, but it was like plasma. And as I grew, I pushed it further and further and closer and closer. And when I went further and further, it was almost like being on a roller coaster, and I wanted to stop it, but it couldn't stop. And suddenly there was this complete expansion. And I saw myself on the bed. And as a child, I must have been about 8 or 10 years old. I couldn't really understand it, but I understood that I was much more. Oh, my dog's barking. I'm sorry. I
That's fine.
understood that I was just so much more than my body. My body was down there, but I was looking at it, and I was really, really big. As I expanded and I was looking down at my body, suddenly the awareness of my body and the awareness of me, I was able to travel in consciousness through my house. So I could see what my family was doing in the kitchen, or I could go to other rooms. And I wondered how this was happening, but it just became easy for me.
Mm.
And I guess I was sick and lonely in my bed. Not that people weren't visiting me, but I could still have that sense of connection while I was journeying just through the house.
Mm-hmm.
And I was still attached to my body. It was an incredibly strange experience. So, from that experience, I was able, through, I don't know how it happened, I was able to be aware of spirits in the
Mm-hmm.
house.
Mm-hmm.
and became much more in tune with people's energy.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess that was my first memory of really there's so much more than our physical bodies.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, I survived and I got better. And then I went through my teenage years and, it was kind of weird. So I stopped it. And then I got married and had children. And for many years, I didn't have a happy marriage. And I think I blocked it off. I blocked that off because it wasn't acceptable. And I just forgot myself. I lost myself. And towards the end of my marriage, um, and I have two older, beautiful children. From the outside, it looked like a perfect family, beautiful house. I had a corporate job, desperately unhappy.
Mm-hmm.
And I would drag myself to work every day. And I thought, there's got to be more than this. The universe has a very funny way of pushing you, kicking and screaming if you don't trust your heart. And I think I call it the heart and the mind connection. And I'd so disconnected from my heart. And I think I started listening to Abraham Hicks, and
Mm-hmm.
she explained to me that we create our reality. And I thought to myself, well, if I got into this reality, I could get out of it. And she
Mm-hmm.
also, I haven't listened to her for many years, but she also said, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, focus on the positive and be happy. So I'd go to my beautiful corporate office every day and look, for everything to be happy with. I was miserable,
Mm-hmm.
miserable. And I started going across the road to the park, a beautiful, simple little park at lunchtime, and realized this was the happiest time of my day in nature. And I kicked off my high heels and I started meditating, and I hadn't done that for so many years. And at that time, I was so worried about what people thought about me, about being weird, about being strange. And I closed my eyes and looked up at the sun in case any of my work colleagues saw me and thought I was really weird. And to cut a long story short, I looked down one day and I saw some gum leaves that had fallen from the tree, and I picked up a gum leaf just as that, I don't know, that piece of nature, that memory that this was my happiest time of the day when I didn't have to talk to anyone or pretend to be someone I wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
And I took it back to my office and hid it behind the computer monitor so no one would see and think I was strange. Anyway, several months later, I was retrenched from the role and I hated it,
Mm-hmm.
but I was terrified at the same time. I was filled with fear. And I packed up my office, and really all that what there was a memory stick or a USB. And I saw behind my monitor the gum leaf, and by this time it was dead and shriveled. And I just received this insight, or just this knowing that if I had stayed there, I would have ended up like that shriveled gum leaf, dead,
Mm-hmm.
lifeless, without care.
Yeah.
And I still remember walking out of the office that day, terrified. My hands were shaking, and I had no idea what I was going to do. But I made a promise to myself and a promise to the universe that from that day on, I would only do what I was passionate about. And I wanted to help others and myself as well. And I guess that's how Passion Harvest started, because I thought I just love learning about universal truths.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know enough, and I want to accelerate this learning. So I don't have time to read all the books. So what I'll do is I'll just interview incredible people like you across the globe. And not only do I learn, but I get to share it with other people. So that's kind of me in a nutshell. I don't know if you can tell
That's
by my
amazing.
accent. I'm originally Australian.
Yeah.
3 years ago, I followed my heart and, crazy ideas, and I moved to the countryside of southwest France, and here I am.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, I have shivers when you tell the story. And I saw an interview with you also where you described this some very interesting time. I guess it was around this time when you had these repetitive dreams of being
Oh
in a
yes,
cage on a cliff, or it was very moving for me to hear that.
yes. Well, I realized. I mean, we all have. People talk about soul paths or soul lessons. What do we come here? And we all have different things to learn. We all
Mm-hmm.
experience conflict and contrast. I think one of my biggest lessons in this life, one of my main themes is freedom.
Yeah.
And freedom for me is very important. Relating to that dream, and I'll just talk about it quickly, it kept reoccurring and
Mm.
reoccurring night after night. I was still married at the time, and I kept seeing this woman in a cage. It was just, those dreams that are so real and you remember every detail. And I
Yeah.
never saw her face.
Mm-hmm.
And she was naked and dirty. And I just knew that she'd been there for many, many years. I would say 20 years plus.
Mm.
And she'd bang on the cage walls and sometimes ripped off her nails from trying to get out so hard. And she was surrounded by this magnificent virgin forest on the top
Mm.
of a cliff.
Mm.
And even days I saw it was raining and she'd hold out her hand to drink water and she'd scratch in the dirt trying to get under the cage.
Mm.
And I kept calling out each night, number one, I didn't want to keep having this dream, but how can I help you? Let
Mm.
me get out. And it was horrific to see this poor woman caged, alone, alone.
Mm. Mm.
I wouldn't say she was afraid. She had just lost all hope.
Mm.
And I guess without hope, there really is nothing. She'd been battered and bruised by life.
Mm.
And I don't even know why she bothered surviving, why she bothered staying alive. It was devastating. And I often see women and men like this that have just lost hope.
Yeah.
And probably on the last time I had the dream, I called out to her again and she looked at me and I couldn't believe it because it was me.
Mm.
She had the same
Mm.
face. And I realized that she had the key to the cage around her neck.
Yeah.
And I said, let me help you. And she said, I'm too afraid. And eventually I helped her get out and we jumped off the cliff. But it's kind of a metaphor that, I mean, it's so emotional for me now
Yeah.
because it was so real and so poignant
Mm.
to my life and keeps reoccurring. And I've got so many lessons to learn. But, we all have the key to our own cage and
Mm-hmm.
we can get beaten down by life and
Mm.
have no idea how to get out. But there's
Mm.
always, always a way. And really, what I've learned, more recently and through my life, is whatever happens, if we can put a positive meaning on it. This happened for a reason. It might not be wanted, it might not
Mm-hmm.
be desired, but how can I transmute this experience and transform it to what have I learned?
Mm.
What can I what can I do and how can I move forward? And that really changes all sorts of timelines. I was thinking the other day, and I still have this problem with unworthiness.
Mm.
And I thought about it from a really deep perspective, whether it's people that treat you badly, or I get a lot of messages about people that their partners are just not treating them right, or
Mm-hmm.
what should they do, or these events aren't working out. And I thought about it from the perspective of consciousness and the perspective of ancestors and lineage.
Mm-hmm.
And this was for me as well. But our ancestors, however far back we can go, have fought in wars, have died for us in some way so that we can live, have
Mm.
fought for our freedom. So why would you ever undervalue yourself? And we do this so often.
Mm.
Why, when we are such a unique piece and puzzle of not only the universe, and we're meant to be here because we're alive, we're here for a reason,
Yeah.
but why would I honor all this lineage that have died and starved and battled and loved for me so I can be
Mm.
here right now?
Mm.
Because we all are so special.
Well, that's really beautiful that you shared that. And I would love to, if you are up for it, to talk a little bit about the journey we did together because
You
you
can
had
ask me
such a
anything. My life is not private anymore.
um, I just loved it when you got, and since I saw you already talked about it, so I guess it's not so private. The experience you had with your dragons. If you could talk a little bit about your experience when I guided you, through that meditation, and what you
Yes.
saw, because it was so beautiful.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for taking that journey with me and connecting with me several months
It was
ago.
a pleasure.
First, I want to say just before the dragons, I have had many experience with dragons, not all the time, but they come to
Hmm.
me often.
Hmm.
But I just want to say first, when we were talking, before we started the journey, and I wrote down
Hmm.
what I experienced, I sensed, and there was absolutely no doubt, as my dog's barking now. I hope you're not hearing my dog,
No.
but there was no doubt that there were dragons circling above my house.
Hmm.
I just knew they were just there. I had no doubt. And as I said, I wrote down everything that happened. And then I went outside. I just was compelled to write, and this rarely happens. And they had this whole telepathic conversation with me. Whereas when they were saying, when you suffer, we suffer. And they said, they kept talking about that I was asleep somewhere. And you
Mm.
explained as well that we have parallel worlds where when we're consciously awake, the other's sleeping. And I said, well, what are you talking about? And trying to understand. And they kept swirling above my head, and so happy that I was recognizing them. I mean, it
Mm.
gives me shivers now. They were swirling. And even though I felt it on my skin, like an airplane going past, just that roar, they were roaring in delight. It wasn't violent. It was like they were my kin, my family
Mm.
in some way. And a younger one, a giant one, came forward and said, Mama, come home.
Mm.
And I just knew then that in some way I was a nurturing figure. And I knew that in a parallel world, I was a dragon.
Mm.
And it just made my heart melt because there was such love, there was such longing, and there was such joy.
Mm.
It was, people talk about when we go to heaven and we meet loved ones that have parted.
Mhm.
And we just know and we receive that welcome, love, and grace and warmth. And perhaps when we're alone or afraid, they're there. They're there to guide us. So that's what it felt like for me.
Yeah.
Just, Mama, come home.
I always start crying when you talk about this. It's like it's
Oh,
so. Oh yeah, it's really beautiful.
so I'll talk about the journey. Thank you so much again. It was incredible.
It
And you
was a
do it
wonderful
online now. So I just want to
experience for
say,
me
reach
too.
out to Eva. She's amazing. Um, there are a few experiences. So if you've listened, I'm talking to the audience, but if you've listened, you take me through this incredible journey with a symbol. And I looked down as I walked out the door into the parallel world. I'm jumping ahead.
Mm-hmm.
But I looked down and my feet were not my own feet. They were claws like a dragon.
Mm.
And I had the sensation, and it was so real, how clumsy it was to walk with these
Mm.
feet.
Mm-hmm.
It just
Mm-hmm.
wasn't necessarily meant for walking. I just knew it. It's like walking with heavy ski boots on. It's just
Mm.
not comfortable and it's not natural. And then I guess the most profound experience was journeying and flying. It just felt
Mm.
like walking as if we were in our human form.
Mm.
And I was guided, you journeyed me to
Mm-hmm.
this geographical location in this parallel world. It was virgin forest. It was beautiful, like out of a mystical. It was still familiar. There were still trees, there were still plants, there were still animals and flowers, but there was just a softness to it.
Mm-hmm.
There was a lushness to it. and the colors were really bright. And I guess even to describe it, it was like there was an absolute stillness,
Mm-hmm.
but there was also noise. And there was darkness, but there was just the most beautiful light. It wasn't dark.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it had just a feeling to it. It felt, like for example, I'm trying to give an example and put it in words. When you're cold and you put a cozy, warm blanket around you, it
Mm-hmm.
just felt safe
Yeah.
and as if I was cocooned and I was flying as this dragon and I landed on this opening in the forest, in this lush green grass. And I saw these elemental beings of light. I didn't necessarily see exactly what they looked like. One could describe them as elves or
Mm-hmm.
fairy beings. They were medium size. And there was some sort of recognition, and they poked out through the greenery and looked at me, and they came closer. And we had this telepathic dialogue, and there was some remembering. They said something along the lines of, "Don't you
Mm.
remember us?" And I said, "I'm not sure. I don't think I
Mm.
do." And I was standing on my big claws with my wings down, relaxed. And then suddenly more of them started coming. And I'm going to say older man, but maybe a more of a, a father figure of this group of energies that lived in the forest, these elementals, touched one of my wings.
Mm.
And it just felt like a soft, gentle breeze. And that was a remembering. And I looked down at my arm and my wing,
Mm.
and it kind of went translucent, but I could see the light. I could see it was like pearls, a string of
Mm-hmm.
pearls, a string
Mm-hmm.
of
Mm-hmm.
pearls. And as he brushed it, I could see that energy.
Mm.
And more of them came to brush me in the most gentle, delicate way. They were no longer afraid of me. And not only doing that or in some way that they were healing me, but they were helping me remember what I'd seen and what I knew. And as they were doing that, I looked around at the forest and I could see, I'm going to describe it like a string of pearls. I could see the trees, everything became like an X ray. It became translucent, but I could see the energy, the
Mm-hmm.
movement, the veins in the trees. I
Mm.
could see down below. I could see every leaf had energy, every rock had life. And I looked below my feet and I couldn't believe it. For a minute, I thought, oh my God, I'm falling, but I wasn't falling. There was an ultrasound, an x ray below my feet, and I could see the earth as well
Mm.
and the energy. And I could see deep into
Wow.
the earth as if it was just layers of in it, layered layers of plasma. I guess
Mm.
that's probably
Mm-hmm.
the word.
Mm-hmm.
Everything looked like plasma, but it was translucent, filled with light where the energy was moving, where it was flowing. And then these beings, I just remember them more of light because they were like sparkles everywhere.
Mm.
And I think they, in some way, for some reason, wanted to share that remembering with me.
Mm.
Um, so
Yeah.
that was an incredible journey experience. And, coming back to this reality as Louisa, it, it also made me realize, of course, we don't, we get on with our daily life and our routines and, just to stop and try and remember that sense, remember that extra sight, and remember that
Yeah.
everything has life. Everything
Mm.
has a frequency, everything has an energy, and we do as well, but I forget as well sometimes.
Yeah.
So I guess that conscious awareness of
Mm.
what is life, why is
Mm.
life, or I guess the question is, who am I, where am I, and what am I doing?
Yeah. And how amazing you are, how many different versions of you there are. And yeah, I think it's wonderful to explore this and to do it for yourself, because when you hear somebody talk about it, it's also wonderful. But Nothing compares to, your own experience, you going there and seeing all this with your own eyes.
Yes, you're incredible. Thank you. It's like, you can read as many books as you want on love. What is love? Describe it. But until you actually experience it yourself,
Yes,
it's not the same.
yes, exactly. I'm so happy. Thank you for sharing it. And thank you for the
It's my
interview with
pleasure.
you. Like I said, I'm a big fan and I really appreciate everything you do.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you to your audience for listening. And thank you very much. I guess I want to leave on a final note.
Mm-hmm.
Very, very simple. My
Mm-hmm.
message:
Mm-hmm.
ask yourself, when you ever have a decision, or generally as you're walking through this journey that we call life, what would love do?